Welcome, everyone, to our webinar. We are excited to have you here today. Our topic today is Stop Cybercrime Catastrophes, an FBI agent's guide to stopping it before it starts. Our presenters are Scott Ogdenbaum and Carrie Bowman. They will introduce themselves in just a moment. I am your moderator today. My name's Stephanie Anderson. We have a very special guest with us, a former FBI agent who will share exclusive insights into combating cybercrime, drawn from years of experience on the front lines. We're excited to dive into today's session and explore actionable strategies to enhance your organization's cybersecurity. So let's get started. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. The webinar will last approximately 60 minutes. There will be a Q&A session live at the end. Don't worry about taking detailed notes. You can receive these presentation slides and the recording after the session. If you do have any questions, please, we encourage you to submit them using the Q&A panel, and we'll address as many as possible during the Q&A. And with that, I'll turn the time over to our speakers.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. How are you today? I'm Scott Ogdenbaum. I'm a retired FBI agent. I had an amazing 30-year career with the FBI spent on the investigation of cybercrime. I am happy to be here with my good friend, Carrie Bowman. And Carrie and I were just talking and had a really good conversation. And I think Carrie just learned that I need readers right now, and I'm really not happy about that. Carrie, we had some really cool conversations beforehand. I'm excited to do this with you. I had a great 30-year career with the FBI. Just happy to be here, happy to be part of this presentation with you. Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and, how did you get involved in the world of information security?
Yeah, absolutely. So straight out of college, I went into consulting. So I have been working in application access security for the last 15 years. And because they made me do audits in between my security projects, I also got my CISA because I was going to get credit for that if I had to do audits. And so I've continued to do that for the last 15 years. So I've helped our customers all across the globe, all different sizes, from small shops to some of the Fortune 50 companies out there, to actually assess their application security and identify how they grant access to users, if that access is risky, and then how they address that. So from the audit perspective, once you get eyes on something and you're aware of risk, what do you do with it? So that's why I'm excited to talk to you today, because I like the action part of things. How do we fix it, right? Or how do we avoid it? More importantly.
That's awesome. That's why this is going to be a great conversation between the both of us here. And I am so happy we got a huge audience here today. And I appreciate everyone taking the time out of your day to talk to Carrie and I. And we want to make this interactive. So make sure you're putting your questions, and we're going to make sure that we answer every question that you put in. Now, I am a retired FBI agent. I'm amazed. I'm 50. I've been retired from the FBI for 7 years. I had an unbelievable 30-year career, spent the majority of my time working on cybercrime, but I didn't want to get into the world of cybersecurity, Carrie. That's not what I wanted to do. I was raised in New York City by a single mom. And it was tough being a single mom back in I graduated high school in 85. And she was just happy I was going from 8th grade to 9th grade. When I graduated high school, she was excited that I had a 70 average. I went to community college and I had a 2.27 grade point average. And when you have a 2.27 grade point average, the world isn't knocking down your door with opportunities. But my mom, who was a forward thinker, filled out an application for me to become a support employee with the FBI, making $5.50 an hour in New York City in 1988. And that started my journey. And I went back to college at night and I worked on my bachelor's degree. I worked on an MBA in finance and information technology at Fordham University in 1992. And you know what the main issue, and I want to see, how do you feel about this? Carrie, in 1992, you know what I was learning at graduate school? That the business units are having a hard time talking to IT. How far have we gotten in 32 years? Are we any closer or what? What do you think?
Now they have a hard time talking to IT and audit, so it's just continued to stay siloed in most cases.
I get it. I get it. Well, let me just tell you quickly about my career. I became an agent in 1994. If you asked the role of an FBI agent in 94, it was so easy. Bad people did bad things to good people. I worked with state and local cops. We put bad guys in jail. What a fun and exciting job to have as a 27-year-old FBI agent, a gun, a badge, a bulletproof vest, playing cops and robbers with my friends, bank robberies, fugitives, drug cases. But in 1998, the FBI became the lead law enforcement agency responsible for the investigation of cybercrime. And in 1997, I had the most advanced computer skills of anyone in the FBI Albany division. What do you think, in your mind, what was advanced computer skills in 1997?
Being able to turn a Word document into a PDF.
Wow. I don't even know if I know how to do that. No, I didn't say that. No, I knew how to use AOL. Okay. So I became the cyber guy for the office. The events of September 11th changed the FBI forever. I went to DC. I started working in the cyber division in 2002, 2003. All of my friends told me I was committing career suicide, and because the cybercrime problem was going to be solved by 2007. That hasn't really worked out. I spent from 2007 to 2018 within the FBI Nashville office handling cybercrime response investigations, and I retired on my 50th birthday. And today I teach individuals and organizations how to reduce their chances of becoming the next cybercrime victim. A lot of people say to me, Scott, do you miss the FBI? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And let me tell you, I had an amazing career. If I had my chance to do it all over again, I would do it. I love being an FBI agent. You hear a lot of things in the news, but I loved trying to help people. So I left the FBI in 2018 to start my own career, just teaching people how to reduce their chances of becoming the next cybercrime victim. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've handled some of the largest breaches in the country. I even wrote a book called The Secret to Cybersecurity. Don't buy it. You're all going to get a copy of it today. Now, when I wrote the book, The Secret to Cybersecurity, I didn't really have a cool title. It was just nothing more than a cool title. Now, Carrie, if you're looking to read a good book by an FBI agent who saved the day, put a lot of bad guys in jail, it's really technical, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not your guy. My career with the FBI was dealing with cybercrime victimizations, and I realized a real truth about cybersecurity, that most cybercrime victimizations could easily have been prevented if my end users were only armed with a few key pieces of information. Am I oversimplifying it? Yeah, I kind of am. But everything you need to keep yourself and your family, and I do a lot of time talking about phishing and social engineering and artificial intelligence, because that's all playing in. And you can read about this in the book. Everyone here is going to get a copy. Share it with your family, because that to me is so important. But, one of the things we're going to talk about today is your organization secure, or the next victim? And Carrie and I are going to talk. We're going to have this conversation back and forth. And we're going to share a lot of things, a lot of commonalities, a lot of the things that I think you as an organization need to really put into play over here. Now, Carrie, don't you think the problem has been getting worse year after year?
Well, if not worse, definitely more expensive. There's one hacker incident that happens, and then there's just a plethora of them. It's just like dominoes. They just knock them down one after the other. We constantly playing catch up.
Now, yeah, I get it. I retired in 2018. I didn't think the problem can get any worse. I thought it was horrible. Now, in 2018, I'm using this slide by Cybersecurity Ventures, which was saying, and here I am, I'm like the town crier in 2018, and even before that, I'm the town crier saying things are getting bad, things are getting bad. The cybercrimes problem is going to be a $6 trillion problem by 2021. And today it's a $10 trillion global problem. That's huge. I can't tell you the difference between 10 trillion and 10 billion, but it's a lot. And let me ask you, do you think it's getting better or do you think it's getting worse?
Me personally, I mean, I just see it continually, if not getting worse, it's getting more difficult. The hackers are smart and they are continually finding new ways to infiltrate organizations, right? It's a constant need to have that. You know, I mentioned I come from the audit side of the house. There's really interesting study that was done this last year, actually by an audit organization. They were talking about like the number one issue that they're having is hiring enough cybersecurity professionals into their organization just to try to manage all of their potential vulnerabilities that they have. So it's a constant need that just continues to increase.
We can go on a side note on that one thing that you just said and go down a complete rabbit hole. There's just not enough people. There is just not enough qualified people. And the problem keeps getting worse. And, you know, I don't like to call them hackers. I call them cyber criminals and nation states. But here I am, I'm the town crier. And I'm talking to organizations and I'm telling them that the problem is going to get worse. And here I am in 2016, providing guidance to the private sector on the prevention of ransomware. And to this day, why do you think I give away guidance from 2016? And it's not because I'm too lazy to get the new guidance. Want to take a guess on this one? This is why am I still giving away guidance from almost 9 years ago?
Because it's still not being addressed or completely successfully put in place.
It's still not being addressed. And we can go into that all the time. And I don't even know if we have a chat or people can ask questions, but you know, I'd love to.
They do, and there's one I wanted to bring up to you. I actually almost said something about AI on the previous slide. So thank you to Tamara for bringing this up. But the question was specifically, do you foresee artificial intelligence impacting the frequency and severity of cyber attacks?
How am I going to do I just did an hour presentation for school universities on the intersection of social engineering, artificial intelligence, and cybercrime. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because the cyber criminals have access to so much information. And all we seem to talk about is phishing. Now, when I sit down with organizations, I tell them, are you training your employees on the 9 different types of social engineering? And it's a trick question because I just came up with 9 different types. But we're talking about phishing. We're talking about text messages, telephone calls, pop-ups, social media hijackings. I go into that. It is going to get worse unless we start training people to recognize these. And by the time artificial intelligence comes in and can prevent all this in one package, we're not going to be thinking for ourselves anymore. I mean, that's a great question. That might be another good topic for me and you to talk about, is that intersection. But I want to go into this question. This is one of the most frequently asked questions that I get all the time. Ransomware. Do we pay the ransom or do we not pay the ransom? I'd love to get some audience participation in here. Like, what do you think? Do you pay or do you not pay? I mean, it's not a black and white question. Everyone's always very hesitant. Carrie, when I go over and I'm doing presentations in front of 100 CISOs and I say, do we pay or do we not? What do you think most people say to me?
I guess it would depend on industry. I know in the last few years, there's been different responses depending on if people were in manufacturing versus healthcare, for example, what they've chosen to do. I would guess your audience is probably 50-50 split on if they think they have to or not. We're starting to get some responses into the chat here. So I'm seeing a good handful of the don't pays. Depending on the situation, it depends. Don't want to, but have to. So yeah, I mean, even our audience responses are fairly 50-50 split. So Scott, in your audience of CISOs, what's the typical answer that you get?
Before I go here, when I was with the FBI, I told people don't pay the ransom. It was just that simple. And this is from a slide that I had probably from 2016. These are all very valid reasons. And I said something in 2016 that really upset a lot of attorneys at the time, which to me was always a lot of fun. And what was it that I said? I said to them, because here's all the reasons why we shouldn't pay the ransom. They're great reasons. But I said in 2016, and I wasn't forward thinking, okay, this was just something that came up. If the bad guys can encrypt your information, they could steal your information. And all of a sudden, everyone freaked out. But today's ransomware is completely different. And let me just kind of go into a situation that we had with a healthcare organization. The healthcare organization, and this is something, and I'd love for you to chime in with me, because when I talk to people about ransomware, they go, hey, we have really good backups. I go, so what? Who cares? Your backups are availability. The bad guys today steal, and I just had this happen. You know, they stole the information first. We had a data breach, okay? A data breach. Then they encrypted the backups, and then they encrypted the network. Let me ask you, how long, Carrie, can an organization survive without access to their information? And I want the audience to jump in with that. How long can you survive?
It depends. It depends on what I'm doing, right? It's quite different if I'm in a healthcare situation where if my nurses can't access patient information, the doctors can't access patient information. That's significantly different from, manufacturing organization. I might not be able to access my shipments of things. I'll lose a significant amount of money.
And it looks
but
like
no one's sitting in the OR waiting on me. So I think it depends on how long I can last. Either way, though, I would just be absolutely bleeding money while stuck.
It's a horrible situation. It's just that simple.
Agreed.
I mean, so we have to really flip the switch and talk about the prevention aspect of everything. Now, I have a pretty bad echo, so you're going to have to excuse me. Now, between 2003 and 2024, I interviewed almost 1,000 cybercrime victims. And from this, I learned what I call the 4 truths to cybersecurity. I wrote about this in my book, and this is, I'm sorry, Carrie, I'm just getting a horrible echo that's coming out. You're just going to have to bear with me for a second.
No worries.
Okay, perfect. So as I was saying, I talk about this in my book. I call this the 4 truths to cybersecurity. And the first truth to cybersecurity is none of my victims ever expected to be a victim. They didn't think they fit the victim profile. They didn't think they had anything worth stealing. How did this happen to me is what I've heard them all say. And I would sit down all the time with organizations and I would talk to them. Do you think you're going to be victimized? And they go, no. And I go, why not? I don't fit the victim profile. Have you heard that at all? You're on the tip of the spear. You're talking to people all the time. How does this resonate with you?
Oh, significantly. In the 15 years that I've been doing this, I would say just about half of the organizations that I ended up working with, it was because they had been hacked or had fraud performed and just had no expectation of it. And again, companies that you wouldn't think of in the forefront of your mind, right? Not financial services companies, not even healthcare. We're talking a chemical manufacturer or polymer manufacturers, things like this, where it's it seems like it's out of place for being hacked, but they have a significant number of secrets, that that are related to what they're manufacturing, things like that. And they're also less expecting of it. So they tend to have less security in place around these things. So I would fully say 50% of the customers that I dealt with, 50% were trying to be preventative and prepare up front. And the other 50% were just usually blindsided by it happening.
Now, I looked behind the scenes of over 1,000 incidents. And a lot of them, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, Silicon Valley of healthcare. And I would sit here and I would talk to companies before they would make. And I once, let me ask you your opinion, revenue wise, because a lot of people say we're a small business. What do you consider a small business from a revenue point of view? How many millions?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, I would say it depends. I mean, small to someone might be 2 million, small to someone else might be 200 million. So I think it depends on your perspective. If I had 2 million in a business, I would think that was big for me. So I would care about it significantly. But if I was coming from a $200 million business, it might seem, significantly less so.
Well, I get that. I had a $300 million company tell me that they were not concerned because they were a small business. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? And they pointed to HCA, which is a $56 billion company. And I'm like, okay, I get it. And they were all taken off guard when they weren't there. And I would hear publicly, one time I had a publicly traded company, $9 billion company, tell me they were not concerned because they were located in Nashville, Tennessee. I had a $12 billion company. And I'm like, where are you getting your information from? People magazine? The cyber criminals do not care the size of your organization. And it leads me to the second truth about cybersecurity, which is once the cyber criminals do their damage, the chances of law enforcement coming in with a magic wand, getting your money back at a business email compromise, getting your data back, your ransomware back, or your brand back. And I think people need to understand that. How does that resonate with you or even the audience? And you're going to have to excuse me. I'm on a 3-second delay, so I shut my volume off when I'm talking to you, or else I'm not going to be able to do this.
No worries. No, this is actually, it significantly resonates. One of the things that I always attempt to explain with my customers is the fact that fraud is more than just the dollars lost, right? The data lost, the brand piece is significant. I think we can all think back to, in the last few years, we can probably all name multiple different large organizations where breaches have occurred. We've all received those letters in the mail, and we've seen their stock prices take a hit because of that. So it's not just the dollars out the door that are impactful to the business. It's everything else. It's the data loss, the amount of money that they then spend for experts like yourself to come in and help them to identify where they need to update things. Companies like mine, where they bring us in to try to put in place those preventative measures. But those are all significant investments that are hitting all at once because of this impact. And again, that's not even talking about the brand, the stock price, and the impacts in that sort of sense. I love the example. We've got one in the chat here, a client that's a one-man shop that said he didn't worry about security because it was too small. And a week later, he called and said that he was hacked. I was sitting on a plane last week with someone who worked for a company that did roads, that did road maintenance. And he said something very similar, not working for an overly large organization, and thought he was fine, and walked in, all his systems locked up, couldn't get access to anything, had to stop and work through that, and couldn't execute on any of his planned jobs while that was happening. And it's just continually taking people by surprise.
Absolutely. And it's a very, very difficult situation when I would get involved, and all of a sudden they go, "You're the FBI. What do you mean you can't get your money back?" We just dealt with a victim in a social engineering crypto scam who lost $5.8 million. $5.8 million. And they go to me, "Well, can you help us get our money back?" When I was with the FBI in Nashville, I was dealing with 5 complaints a week. Today, it's 150 complaints. And the FBI has not increased in size or anything like that, which leads us to the third truth about cybersecurity. This is why I don't call them hackers. I call them cyber criminals, because when I was a young FBI agent, crime was a localized problem. Bad people did bad things to good people, and we put bad guys in jail. Today, our adversaries are located in Russia. They're located in China. They're located in Iran. They are located in West Africa and all over the world. The Secret Service and the FBI do a pretty good job. But I was just reading something in the paper, Carrie, this morning, that the Nigerians arrested 780 people involved in the romance scams. Do we think has the problem disappeared now? What do you think?
I'm going to go with a resounding no.
No, it isn't. So I want to ask you, and I want to ask you, how do you feel about this? Because this is what I talk about all the time. Problem keeps getting worse. We're spending more and more money. Bad guys steal your stuff. You're not getting it back. And putting bad guys in jail is really, really hard. How do you think that makes the average person feel?
It's very frustrating. It makes you feel a little bit helpless, or like you're always playing catch up, or you're spending a lot of time, effort, money just to not lose something that you've worked for versus gaining anything from it. And I think that's actually a great point of conversation, which is a lot of times it's hard to explain to people the value of prevention because they don't feel the pain until afterwards. So I was mentioning 50% of my customers that I work with are coming to me after the fact because preventatively they didn't want to invest that time, that money on something that just might happen. And I love the point. One of the Q&A responses we had, someone dropped a comment saying a lot of people don't really understand once they are hit by ransomware what the next few days look like. Communication to lawyers, to banks, to board of directors. They don't understand that fear that, really the levity of what's going, or the requirements that are going to come down at them as soon as that happens. And I think that's a great point. It's just, they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, but nobody likes taking the medicine up front to avoid it. It's you don't have the instant gratification, right, of that payoff of something. And so trying to make that business case, that's something I'd be interested to hear your perspective on. That's something that a lot of customers, when I'm working with them, they come to me and say, help me make this case to my executive leadership team on why prevention is so important versus dealing with it after the fact.
It all goes back to the first truth of cybersecurity. Nobody ever expects to be a victim. And I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to roll the dice. Remember, people treat information security as a cost, not an investment. And I'm telling you, I got very, very depressed. I joined the FBI to help people. The harder I worked when I was a younger age, the more bad people I put in jail. The harder I worked when I started working cybercrime, the more depressed I got because I couldn't get anyone's money back. I couldn't put bad people in jail. And then I realized the fourth truth to cybersecurity, and that is a majority of my victimizations easily could have been prevented if my end users were only armed with a couple of key pieces of information. I talk about this in the book, and I just want to cover these points. If I could go back in time, 90% of victimizations came down to a couple of key things. Social engineering, number one tool in the cybercriminals tool belt. The account compromise, a stolen username and password, got people into the keys to the kingdom. most people were using the same passwords for mission critical accounts. They didn't identify their mission critical accounts. We keep so much stuff in cloud accounts that nobody even knows where their stuff is. And the number one sign that someone is a victim is they're not using two-factor authentication. This is the whole thing in the book. And I'm not telling, that's the thing about the secret to cybersecurity. There is no secret. But it's the other 10% that's kind of challenging that I want to really kind of dive in with you with the rest of our presentation, because I want to talk a little bit about the commonalities. And let's just kind of talk through these together on 90% could have been prevented. But let's, go through each one of these over here. In almost every one of my enterprise level data breaches, and let me tell you, Carrie, is it a bad day when an organization has to contact the FBI and say they had a problem?
I'm going to say that wouldn't be my favorite day.
Do you know what's worse than that day?
Announcing it to the world that you had a bad day and what you lost.
No, you having a knock on your door at 12 o'clock and the FBI tells you that your stuff has been stolen. And that's what I want to really go into, because that was most of the data breaches. They lacked data classification. They didn't know what were their crown jewels. How often do you see that in organizations?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I specialized in when I was doing application security for customers was actually identification of sensitive or critical data. So those crown jewels, a lot of times is how people refer to it. Because if we don't, I always like to say we don't know what we don't know, and that's what's scary. So if we do not know what's sensitive, we have absolutely no way to monitor it, to lock it down. So a significant number of my projects were focused on that. So just going through all the data that existed in these various different applications and helping the customer to understand what they had out there.
And just think about how much sensitive data lives in an organization, that in the different silos of the organization. Think about the sensitive information that HR has. Think about the sensitive information that marketing has. I mean, everyone's outsourcing their marketing, their social media platforms, and I've seen a lot of breaches that occur. And then there's such an nobody, first of all, they don't know what they need to classify. And then they give access to everyone. And I've seen that a lot, because I would go in and we'd break the bad news and we'd say, who has access to the information? And they gave access to everybody, even the summer interns. What's your thoughts on that?
It's funny that you say the summer interns. I actually had a customer that brought me in to do, of all things, an analysis of their SharePoint site, because one of their interns had found sensitive data in the CEO's personal folder structure, because they weren't aware of the information that was being placed out there and who had access to it. So I think that goes back to your second point there on not knowing who has access to the data. In addition to internal resources, we've seen a significant uptick in contractor and third-party vendor management issues. So when you're bringing in a contractor or a third party, or it's getting to that point where it's fourth parties, right? Someone subcontracted to someone who is a vendor for you. How do you know what they have access to? How are you reviewing that? How are you monitoring it? How are you mitigating that risk? It's becoming more and more prevalent.
And that's a good point when we start talking about the new buzzword is, supply chain attacks. And everyone's like, well, what are you doing to verify your supply chain? And I'm sitting with companies that can't even handle their own stuff. How do you bring that together, Gary, when people can't even figure out their own stuff, and now you have to start thinking about third party? And that's not an easy question, but
Well, I mean, I tend to be quite a pragmatic and what's the word I'm looking for? Quite tactical. So I like having strategy conversations, but I really love when you take the tactical pieces of how to execute that strategy and kind of just build out a step-by-step plan. And in my mind, it's almost the order in which you have it here, right? So first things first, I have to know what's sensitive. So I need to get a list of what's the scope of my landscape, what's my ecosystem, across IT, what data lives where, what's sensitive. Then I need to understand who has access to what. And once I understand who has access, I can break that down into groupings, right? My employees, my and different types of employees, right? I might have IT admins who have significantly different access from just, a typical end user in the business, or someone who's a super user. And then I need to understand my contractors, and then I need to understand those third parties, and then I need to put in place governance policies. So what are my policies around who can access that different data? But again, it's starting back at step one. What exists in my system? What is classified as sensitive? Where does it live? And then I get to define, how am I allowing people to see this or use it? If you don't have those steps in place, then you can't ever get to a point where you are actually governing. Do I let this person keep this access, or do I take it away? You need the rules first, right? What are my rules of enforcement? So in my mind, it's, I have a coworker who likes to say, you can eat the elephant with small bites. So it's that idea, right, of one little step at a time, setting yourself up to be able to actually execute and lock down and restrict things and know who has access and what's appropriate.
Boy, if my victims would have talked to you beforehand, they probably wouldn't have been victimized, because these are just things that were, I'm glad there are people like you out there who are really focusing on these types of things, because, during my career, I've seen it in almost every sector. I had a healthcare chief information security officer dealing with a situation where he had 1,800 accounts that haven't been accessed in over a year. Talk a little bit about the risk factor when that happens to an organization. You have all these accounts that are just sitting out there and nobody's accessing them. And a lot of people in management were like, whoa, what's the big deal? Nobody's accessing them. Who cares? Explain why that's so important.
So there's a few things. One, I mean, if we're trying to follow a least privileged access model, the idea is that people get the access they need to do their job and nothing more. If someone's not accessing something, why do they need it? Whether that's an account or a specific piece of access within a system for their live account, we don't need to leave that out there because it leaves risk. So you talked about having these cyber criminals who can get into a system. A lot of times they're using existing credentials that are out there. It's a lot more likely that they won't be caught as quickly if they use credentials of someone who's no longer around, because that person won't notice their password has been changed. They can't log in. That was part of the identification of one of the, I forget what it was, a few years back. The person realized they couldn't get into their own account, and that's how they identified it. But if this is a non-existent user, you're not going to have that person to catch it. And then similarly, if we're just talking about a baseline, if for no other reason, you will fail an audit. So there's an audit specifically in IT General Control and ITGC that's specifically about terminated users or users who are no longer employed, and having rules around the time frame in which their access needs to be removed from the organization, specifically because it increases your risk exposure if you don't do that. So at a minimum, have fun explaining that to audit, and you're going to have an audit finding. And if they find it enough times in a row, they will call it out as a significant deficiency or possibly a material weakness. And you have to report that, which then can impact your stock prices when your shareholders find out about it. So it can have significant downstream impacts, even if no one takes advantage of it, to infiltrate your system or to be a bad actor within your applications.
Sure. And good luck explaining it when I've seen executives have to testify in front of Congress on how come this was an audit finding 3 years in a row and you didn't do anything about it. So this slide really just shows it could happen to just any type of organization that's out there. So let's just come up with some of the key takeaways that we would see all the time that, if my, besides the 90%, I mean, these are things that are just so important. We have to prioritize users access control. only the people who need to have access to that information should have it, and also have really good, strong logging capability. If we don't have that, we can't do it. It's 2025 and people still aren't using two-factor authentication. They still think it's a pain. And I'm like, that's the number one question. I had a healthcare organization. They got they got advanced access to an admin's account who didn't have two-factor authentication. And let me tell you, everyone, if you have a problem, you could call me. I can't do anything. I'm not getting your money back. I'm not putting anyone in jail. I'll just listen empathetically. When victims contact me, I feel like I'm hospice for a victim. I can't do anything except I ask these series of questions. That's why the auditing is so important. And I am such a big believer, and this is where I get brought in a lot. And I'm amazed, Carrie, I'm amazed that I have a living that I get brought into organizations to tell them basic things. I don't have a secret to cybersecurity, but I'm not the hero in this story. And we have to adopt this proactive cybersecurity stance. I'm on LinkedIn all the time giving videos about how to stay safe without spending money on these things. And, between the combination of this thing, and what we talked about in my book, it brings me to the question that I want to ask you, Carrie. So what the heck are you guys doing after everything we talked about today? What do you have to say that you can help these people here today mitigate the risk?
No, I appreciate that. And hopefully this will be useful to those in the audience who are looking for, potential options. I'll just do a very brief who is Pathlock. So I mentioned that my background is that I have been in SAP security, or not SAP, sorry, and other applications, SAP, Oracle, Infor, systems like that. So an application security expert for the last 15 years and an auditor as well. The reason I'm at Pathlock is because after spending 15 years implementing risk and compliance solutions for customers, I actually came over to a company that produces a software that addresses that. And so one of the things that Pathlock does is specifically have on staff a team of certified auditors and practitioners who help to manage the suite of tools and to drive forward, what that innovation looks like. And some stats that go along with what Scott's been talking about here, right? 75% of controls are tested manually. We were just looking at the prior, call out that you had around audit and preventative checks being so important. When you're doing that manually, it's extremely time intensive, can be prone to manual error, and it's not cost effective at all. Almost 50% of companies reported material weaknesses in 2022. So there is a cost associated with that reporting of it. And when you combine that with the fact that the organizational body, so here in the States, we have SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, which is something that we have to comply with if we are a public company. And the body that manages that is called the PCAOB. I say all of this to say what's really interesting is that even with almost 50% of companies gaining material weakness or being tagged with material weaknesses, the PCAOB has audited the audit companies who identify those material weaknesses. And they've identified where these companies haven't been as strict as they should be. And they're specifically cracking down on that to the point where these external audit companies are actually bringing in quality assurance officers so that they have to pass their own essentially audit of their practices. And what that means is that this 50% number is very likely going to continue to go up because those audit companies are going to be even more strict when they start to look at stuff. So going back to that conversation around how this can impact our brand and the cost out the door for having to be compliant with these requirements can significantly increase. So with that said, what do we offer? Without going into too much detail here, Pathlock Cloud is a SaaS platform that we offer, and it has three main products: application access governance, continuous controls monitoring, and cybersecurity application controls. And the modules that you see underneath here are pretty closely aligned with exactly what Scott's been talking about today. So access risk analysis is the ability to identify risk within your organization, be that a separation of duties risk, so the ability to perform something that may be fraudulent, create a vendor, pay a vendor, create a purchase order, do a goods receipt. Also sensitive access. So when we talk about crown jewels, this is the ability to identify those crown jewels and then to report on them and monitor who has that access. And that really feeds into the next step, which is that compliant provisioning. So if we think about access risk analysis as baselining our risk environment, what exists out there in terms of access, compliant provisioning is the next step. So if I now know the risky access, as I'm provisioning access to users, I want to take that into account. I don't want to introduce net new risk into my environment without being aware of it and putting controls around it. Similarly, certifications. You brought up users that are no longer active, still having access. Certifications is this idea that we need to review on a regular basis if users have stale access that they don't need anymore. Maybe they've changed jobs. Maybe they're not executing something they thought they would be as part of their job responsibilities. They may have left the company. We want to make sure that we take that away. And by layering in that risk concept, it's really fascinating. If people review access, it's like a 2 to 3% revocation rate of just user A has access to B, do they get to keep it or not? 2 to 3% of the time, they'll actually take the access away. As soon as you layer in risk and let them know that if they keep that access, it's going to cause a risk, and if you can tell them if they've used the access or not, 10x, you see a 20 to 30% revocation rate, because they can very easily see, I'm not letting them keep that risk. I didn't realize they had access to this sensitive piece of information. Nope, that person's not going to keep it. So it's really important to, consider that as we're, again, like you said, addressing who has access to what and what can they do with it. Elevated access, you had a call out on privileged access management, right? This is that concept. For some of those things that are so sensitive, we don't want people to have standing privileges to them. So thinking about what can we actually take away from standing privileges and let people essentially check it out when they need it, request it, get approval for it, log what they've done with it. So actually keep a change log of what they perform with that sensitive access, and then remove that access when they've completed their task, and have someone review what they performed to ensure that it was secure. Those are all things that are part of a typical risk and compliance program, a governance program that help us to address risk. And like you said, be preventative. If we know what our risks are, we can monitor them and we can try to address them up front. And then once we kind of build that baseline of maturity as an organization, we can look at optimization. So we can look at continuous monitoring, right? Where we're actually monitoring the transactions that are occurring, so we can see, did someone pay the same vendor they created? And if so, what vendor was it, on what day, and for how much? So it can really take that to the next step of trying to quantify that risk. But all of these things, the goal of all of them is to be preventative, to be upfront and acknowledging the risk that we're exposed to and how we manage it. And then vulnerability management, threat detection, like you said, being able to see it as soon as it happens if we have weaknesses or vulnerabilities. And before I move on to the next slide, I'm just going to, I saw a couple questions come in that were specifically around this, about apps that are supported. So any of your major ERP applications, think of your financial or operationally critical applications. So SAP, Oracle, JDE, the ones listed in this, all of those it's applicable to, but also think of your line of business applications, a Coupa, a Manhattan Warehouse, Blackline, Ariba, Bassware, things like that, where you may be doing other parts of your operations. Those are also still applicable because they can have that sensitive information in there. So as Scott and I were talking about earlier, knowing what your landscape looks like and what your crown jewels are and where they sit and where anything sensitive may be occurring within the business, you'll want to take those into account as well. And then I thought there was another one here, but we'll circle back to these some of these other questions. Enterprise clients working within small to mid-sized market. We work with customers of all sizes. I have some customers that have a few hundred users. I have customers who have tens of thousands of users. So it really does span the breadth from your small or mid-enterprise organizations to Fortune 100 companies. So it's that full breadth there, because no matter what size of your organization, like we were talking about before, you do need to be secure because there are risks involved if you're not looking at that preventatively. And what are some of the benefits of this? So I mentioned earlier, one of the things oftentimes that customers ask me is, how do we put forth a business case for this? How do we convince management that it's better to be preventative than to be reactive? And these are just some of the stats that you can see the value come through when you implement programs like this. So you take the 4 truths that Scott's talked about, and you take some of the notes he's got on like key steps to compliance, key considerations. And then you look at an automation tool like what PathLock can offer. The benefits you can see out of that are a reduced cost of compliance. That's huge. That 70% number is directly associated with the ability to automate some of those controls, to manage and monitor them, and to ensure that they're all standardized across your various applications. If you can automate that, then you can save significant time and energy for your IT and business and audit users. Automation of IT tasks, a really simple one is if you think about joiner, mover, leaver. Someone joins the company, they change jobs within a company, they leave the company. That example of having hundreds of accounts that were unused and unaddressed, you can automate that. So you can actually associate an HR trigger or a trigger from like an Active Directory, something like that, to tell you when someone's job changes or when someone new joins or someone leaves. And you can actually automate the changing of their access in the associated applications. So that kind of automation, that keep the lights on stuff, automate it. Standardize it, automate it. It takes out the potential user error and manual error of forgetting to take access away from someone or giving them incorrect access. And what it lets you do is focus your IT resources on, business critical projects or business value add projects. That example of cybersecurity skill sets being one of the biggest areas that businesses are seeing a lack of. There was in the report, it said something like 62% of organizations report being understaffed. And the number one skill set was around like cybersecurity and identity and access management. This is something, Scott, I'd be interested in from your perspective. How frequently do you see organizations being able to hire in additional cybersecurity experts versus trying to upskill their existing employees?
That's such a tough question. I was dealing with a friend of mine who was looking to hire someone in that space. First of all, there was no one available, and the salaries were so expensive. And that's why the automation process of this is so absolutely important. Because I know it's the holiday season and we're in the spirit of hope. Hope is not a strategy for cybersecurity, and neither is being reactive. We have to prevent these things from occurring. And it's so important. And I just love the way you showed it out because, you're making the business case for this. It's so important. We're not going to be able to trade our way and start hiring more and more people. And unfortunately, a lot of companies are offshoring their stuff to foreign countries like the Philippines. And no offense, but now you don't have any control over that stuff. So that's why what you guys are doing with the automation is so important.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's a difficult and expensive skill set to try to hire in for those particular, backgrounds, especially in cybersecurity. And then the last piece there, tangible risk reduction. So going back to that idea of it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes to do the preventative stuff up front. But if you can show a tangible reduction in your risk exposure as an organization, that can be a significant factor that shows the value in what you're doing. So I gave that example of a 10x just by showing people the access that people had, and if it was risky, seeing them revoke that access. They took that step as members of the business because they became more informed. As soon as they were made aware, this is my data that I have called out as a sensitive or a crown jewel item, and I have given someone access to it. As soon as they see that line of sight and have that ability to see that information very clearly presented to them, they reduce the risk of the business by taking that access away from people. And then, like I said, you can get into, with automation, continuous monitoring, so you can see when the risks actually are occurring and dollar amounts associated with it. All of that makes it tangible and real to people and helps them take action on reducing risk. And
So would
I
this
love
help
one of the...
with an organ? I just have one thing.
Yeah.
I see a lot of organizations, there's a disconnect between, you know, HR and information security, that HR will fire somebody and then the information security people never, because the email doesn't get sent. How are you able to streamline that at all?
Yeah, so that would be that joiner, mover, leaver process with HR triggers. That is a perfect example of
Mm.
something that a lot of customers, and it's become, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, that's something more and more customers are looking for, is that automation piece. And that's a great example of one of the frequent audit failures that you would see is if you have, depending on your turnover as an organization, I've had customers that they deal with maybe 10 termination tickets in a month, right? They don't have a lot of turnover. They have a smaller user force. And then I've dealt with customers who have, we're talking hundreds of thousands of employees globally with a 30% turnover rate. So you're talking about, yes, tens of
And that's
thousands
the
of
whole
tickets.
insider thread.
And
You know, I
so,
can't tell you how
yeah,
often these things occurred where I would end up getting the calls when I was with the FBI, and then we would go over to the U.S. Attorney's Office because, you know, they took the information and then they would always go back and say, well, what steps did the company take to keep themselves safe? And there were
exactly. You
none.
think about liability, and a lot of companies have, whether they have their customers' data, they may have vendor data or partner data in there, so they can become liable. I worked with a customer who that was the driving effort for their internal process change and the implementation of some of this is that one of their vendors was breached because that vendor though had inappropriate access to their systems. They had to stop everything. Their CISO was doing a full on just analysis of everything that vendor could touch, what they had access to see, because they hadn't appropriately removed that access and there was a breach down the line from one of these vendors. They were impacted by it directly. So it's definitely it, it impacts. It's more than just your current users. It's who had access before, what are the third parties coming in, what can they see, what can they do. It's part of HR, it's part of your your financials, every other piece of it. It's all tied together. So the more we can do to address that, the more that we can as a business try to be secure. With that, I'm going to move off this page actually, just so we can go into some Q&A because I see a lot of good questions coming in here, and I'd love to use the
No,
last
that's
couple minutes
awesome.
here
We talked for an
to talk
hour
about those.
already. It feels like five
I
minutes.
know, I know. One of the things I want to
Yeah,
talk on
let's
here,
make
someone
this
asked.
interactive. We respect everybody's time,
Mhm.
but please, if you have questions, let's stick around. If that's
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. I'm good to stick around for a little time. I want to make sure we answer everyone's questions. And one of these
I
is
just don't see them.
oh, no, I can read them out to you. Front-end data can be addressed by restricting. How back-end data can be addressed that's residing in the cloud somewhere in data centers. Is this something you see coming up often, Scott? How people are addressing their data center information and how that's locked down and secured?
It's just nobody ever reads the, what is it, the thing, because the data, you know, people just think they put it in the cloud and then it's safe and secure, but they're not taking the steps to do it. You know, they're holding the data, but you still own the data. So
Correct.
that's why, and nobody's hacking data centers. They're hacking your access, your end users. Are you still allowing your users access to the cloud after they were terminated? That's a bigger issue.
Yeah, correct. So it does all go back to we're always going to have data sitting somewhere. It may be in the cloud, it may be on-prem, it may be somewhere else, but who can get to it and how can they get to it and how do we monitor that? That's definitely the first step in prevention there. There's a question about a view on zero trust. Is it marketing hype or panacea? I would say zero trust, much like zero risk and least privilege, they're all great marketing words that help us hone in on a goal. So can we ever get to zero risk or zero trust? No. But what it helps us work towards is just like an audit, we know we'll never get to zero risks because we'll never have enough employees to have everyone doing one thing alone. So what we aim for is zero unmitigated risks, meaning I'm aware of the risk in my environment and I have put controls in place to mitigate that risk. So I think zero trust is very similar. Will we ever get there? No. But can we take significant steps in ensuring that we're following a least privileged access model? People only get access to what they're using and what they need. And if it's causing a risk, we monitor it actively. We can do that. And that's a good goal to move towards.
And if 90% of what I dealt with easily could have been prevented, why don't we just do these things first? I mean, so often I'm just seeing companies not using two-factor authentication on email, and I'm seeing it on executives. You know, if we don't have that proper mindset, how do we get to these advanced things? That's what I get all frustrated about.
Absolutely. What about this one? We have a question around, can a whitelisting type of strategy help us strengthen access controls of endpoint devices or internal systems? How do you feel about whitelisting to impact the review process?
It's very difficult from what I see, but that's what we really have to get back to, is just allowing trusted applications to run. But even when you do that, we're seeing, you know, we're seeing flaws in Microsoft and Adobe. It's very challenging. But if you allow anyone to install anything on their computer, how do you patch it? And if you don't know what you have, it makes it very difficult. That's why bring your own device is really very challenging.
Yeah, I love that call out. If you are going to whitelist something that doesn't address the concept of patches and security and, you know, what exactly the vulnerabilities may be associated with that. So I won't say you can't do a whitelisting strategy to strengthen access controls, but I do think there's a significant other number of preventative actions that should be considered along with that strategy. So that is the last question that I see in here. And I know we're just a couple minutes over time. So Scott, I don't know if you have any closing words, or Stephanie, if you have anything that we need to do to wrap up here.
Yes, so thank you for that webinar, and we're so grateful for all the questions and everything that you guys have sent in. As a thank you for joining us, we're excited to share a free audiobook copy of Scott Augenbaum's The Secret of Cybersecurity, a simple plan to protect your family and business from cybercrime. Now, let me explain how you can claim your free audio copy, The Secret of Cybersecurity. In order to claim this, look for the giveaway widget on your webinar page. Click Get Your Free Copy. This will redirect you to the book page. Then enter the coupon code. On the book page, click Have a Coupon and enter the code PATHLOCK. So just write in PATHLOCK and apply the code. To apply the code, click Apply, and your free audio copy will be available to download. Now, let me just go over that again. So go
Stephanie,
to the giveaway
I have a
widget
list over here on my email.
Sorry, go ahead.
I have 100 people have already signed up for it. So I think the instructions were out there and they've been getting it for the past hour. So this is awesome.
Great. Perfect. So again, just if you haven't already done it, click on the giveaway widget, click Get Your Free Copy, enter the coupon code, which is PATHLOCK, click Apply, and you should be able to download it. It's that simple, so just make sure to take advantage of this exclusive offer to enhance your cybersecurity knowledge. And with that, I just want to say thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Had a blast, Carrie. We got to do this again for another couple. We can do a telethon.
Agreed.